Welcome to Profit Boss Radio, where successful women have paved the road to their own financial freedom. Each week, your host, Hillary Hendershot, financial coach, money mindset expert, and experienced wealth manager, will help you discover the keys to the wealth and peace of mind you want and deserve in her no-nonsense and authentic style. Starting right now.
Welcome to Profit Boss Radio, episode 40. We are here today to talk about the movie Equity, which is groundbreaking in so many ways in its portrayal of women in power and women on Wall Street. It has an all-star cast, including Anna Gunn from Breaking Bad and Portlandia. She is the main protagonist. Her character is Naomi Bishop, the investment banker, and alongside her star Alicia Reiner. She plays a white-collar, I think she's a government lawyer, and she's from Orange is the New Black. And then Sarah Megan Thomas playing Naomi's maybe protege or maybe someone who just wants to oust her and replace her. So it's a very exciting setup. And the film is still in theaters as of the day of this recording. And I am here with Amy Fox, the film's writer. Amy, welcome to Profit Boss Radio.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Would you tell us your story and what brought you to this place where you're writing films with all-star casts and how you got your start and how exciting is all of this for you now?
Sure. Yeah, it's been very exciting. I started out in the world of theater, and after college, I moved to New York. This is about 20 years ago now. I moved to New York to pursue playwriting and to try to get my start in theater in New York City. I had a bunch of plays produced. I got involved with a couple of theater companies, and pretty soon my path started to cross with filmmaking. And what happened was that one of the plays I had off Broadway got a nice review in the Times, and Merchant Ivory Film Productions contacted me to adapt it for them. That ended up being my first film. It was called Heights. It came out in 2005. And from that point, I kept writing both plays and film. I started teaching at NYU in the graduate film school. And I had a couple of projects in development. I spent a few years developing a script that I still care a lot about, but it was a period piece, which is a really hard thing to get made these days. I had just sort of set that aside and was looking to figure out what my next project was going to be. And I was approached by the two actors that you mentioned, Sarah Megan Thomas and Alicia Reiner, who had recently formed a production company. And they were both people I had worked with in my theater days. They had both acted in work of mine and produced work of mine. And they wanted to start this film company with the mission of creating more engaging, interesting roles for women, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. Mm-hmm. And so they came to me and they said, we're starting this company. We'd like our first project to be a movie that tackles Wall Street from a female perspective. And we'd love for you to come on board and develop that story and write it for us. So that was how it started.
Very great. And would you give us a brief summary of the film and obviously no spoilers?
Yes. So the film is the story of, as you mentioned, Anna Gunn plays Naomi Bishop, and she is an investment banker who has been in the business about 20 years and is really hitting the glass ceiling. She's done well. She's been consistently promoted, but she's hitting this place where she's very near the top, and she's trying to figure out what will get her to that next top executive level position. She is someone who a lot of what she does is IPOs, initial public offerings, and she mostly for tech companies. And she's recently had a deal that's gone south on her. And so she's kind of coming off of that loss and trying to rebuild herself. And she takes on a new IPO, which is a tech company called Cache that's building a social network that's absolutely secure from hackers and has really very steep privacy settings. And so she takes on this IPO. And really, it's sort of about the film tracks that deal and her efforts to keep climbing the ladder at the firm. At the same time, as you mentioned, she has a VP who's looking up to her, but also competing with her. She has an old college friend who is this prosecutor who happens to be investigating the firm and happens to be investigating a man that Naomi has a romantic relationship with, who works on the other side of the bank. All these threads get tangled up into a big old scandal, which you need in a financial.
You do. And there really are no shortage of characters trying to take Naomi down. And I think that's really what struck me about the film is that like everywhere she turns, there are people wanting to take what she has. And it sort of gives you this impression that being a woman with power really makes you a lightning rod for pain. And there's this speech by Naomi in the beginning of the film about how she loves money and she likes knowing that she has it. And there are a lot of the reviews for the film mention this speech. And I mean, I watched it. I can't even imagine a woman saying those things in a circle of other women right now. I'm thinking about, my local National Association of Women Business Owners chapter. And I can't imagine someone standing up and saying, I just really love money. And I don't think we're in that place yet where women can talk openly about having a love for money, don't you think?
Well, it's interesting because that line came directly from an interview I did. It was the first woman I interviewed for this movie because it was really important to me and my collaborators that we do a lot of research. I had never worked in finance myself, and we interviewed close to 100 women and men who had worked on Wall Street. And the very first phone call I had was with a woman, and she was describing to me what it was like to get started as a banker in the 80s and some pretty openly misogynistic things that happened, like strippers on the desks and this kind of thing. And I said to her, well, what got you through that and what kept you coming to work every day? And I expected that she would say something about, resilience or character or her role models. And instead she said to me very frankly, she said, well, I really like money. And like you say, I didn't feel that I'd ever heard a woman say that so straightforwardly with no sense of apology. And I immediately knew that I wanted to put that in the film and that I also wanted to sort of understand what that means. Because money, the speech has been compared in some of those reviews to the greed is good speech from the original Wall Street. But I never saw it that way because I started asking women what money meant to them. And it means a bunch of things. It means, and she talks about these things in that speech. So it means for some women, it means security. So some of the women I spoke to, a lot of them had not grown up rich, had in fact grown up in households where there was a real struggle around money and where there was not enough money. And some of them at a very young age had looked at their mothers, in many cases, a single struggling mother, and said, I'm not going to live like this. I'm going to be in a job where my kids are never going to wonder, or my family, no one's going to wonder where the next paycheck's coming. So that's what money meant for some people. For other people, it meant a sense of power and agency. There was an idea that sort of no matter how much status you might achieve, that if you are not in control of your own finances in a capitalist society, that's not real power. And so it was a very interesting intersection of things that money means for men and women. And that's really what I wanted to get at.
And I think Naomi faces, again, all kinds of resistance. There's this line about how Naomi rubs people the wrong way, which of course means she's too assertive. I think the line is sharp elbows. She has sharp elbows, which obviously nobody on Wall Street would say to a man. So I think you do a really great job of sort of giving us the perspective of this woman who's really fighting to the top, but sort of being criticized and threatened for it kind of all along the way. Is that the way you wrote her in your mind?
Absolutely. And, this double bind that women find themselves in, which we heard about in our interviews, we read about that, we see it right now in our political campaign, where no matter what a woman does, she is judged. So if she's too nice, she's judged for that. If she's too assertive, she's judged for that. One thing that's really interesting to me is that those phrases like sharp elbows and rub people the wrong way, these are actual phrases that come up again and again when you read about performance reviews for women in the corporate world. And in my experience, most women who see the film relate to those phrases and say, oh, yes, that was said to me, or I know those phrases well, or I know exactly what that dynamic is. What's been interesting is that a lot of men really enjoy the movie, but a lot of men seem really oblivious to those phrases. Like a lot of men have said to me, oh, I don't think there was any sexism between her and her boss.
Are you kidding?
Which is astonishing. And some of these men who've said this to me are friends of friends of my husband's or friends of my husband's. And it's astonishing. And their wives are looking at them like, what, how could you not see this? But it's really opened my eyes to just how much we need to educate, because some of these guys consider themselves really supportive of women and feminists, and yet they didn't see that for what it was in the film, which we thought was pretty obvious.
Oh, it's blatant, right? And there's this generational issue too. So she's got it kind of resistance from the top and then this threat from the bottom, to be oversimplified. But I mean, between Naomi and Aaron, because Aaron really relates to the world like it is her oyster. And then like, oops, she gets pregnant and she is still in a man's world. I mean, the old guard of Wall Street is pretty much the definition of a man's world. Like there's no Title IX at the investment bank. So Aaron, I think, starts to feel that she may have overestimated herself. Yes?
Exactly. It's funny you mentioned that, because Sarah, who was one of the producers in the film and also plays that role, she was a college athlete, and she describes that sort of growing up in a generation with Title IX and thinking, oh, the world is my oyster. And I think we see that again just in a lot of the generational differences, that in terms of the political situation right now, we see that women in their 20s maybe haven't encountered this level of entrenched institutional sexism. And so there seems to be more of a naivete or more of a sense of I can do it all. And then kind of in their 30s, they seem to come up against, oh, this is a little harder than I thought it was going to be.
And this show really focuses on money. That's why the equity film is right on topic. But I feel like there's this other undercurrent of what this film is doing, because, and I know this is only because I have a good friend who makes movies, is that it is a foregone conclusion in Hollywood that people do not see films to watch women, that a box office hit has to have a male lead. And not only that, but men have something like 5 times as many actual lines in movies as women. Is that true?
Yes. There are a lot of statistics about this. Gina Davis has done really incredible work. She has an institute that studies this, among other people, but she has published a lot of studies and statistics, how many female protagonists, especially around programming for children and the question of sort of what are the role models we're presenting in the media. And the statistics are pretty dismal. And that was a way that this film was really an opportunity for us to raise questions about kind of the treatment of women in the corporate world, at the same time raising questions about the treatment of women in Hollywood by taking action of, Sarah and Alicia with this production company were committed to hiring a female writer, a female director, and to having this film with 3 really strong female lead roles. And also that the film barely dips into the personal lives of these characters. I mean, they have to be fully fleshed human beings in order to be characters. But the idea is that most of the time when women do have a leading role, it's as somebody's wife or it's a love story. It's very rare to get roles where what consumes a female character is something other than a relationship.
Well, first, let me ask, in your opinion, how's the reception been? So you set out to do this amazing thing. And it's interesting because Hollywood, in my opinion, is often anti-Wall Street. And so you've married these 2 iconic sort of concepts and businesses, Hollywood and Wall Street. How's it been? How's it performed?
We're thrilled with the reception in a lot of levels. So first off, we got accepted to Sundance.
Congrats.
Thank you. So we premiered at the pretty much the top place you can premiere an independent film in this country. We sold the film while at Sundance to Sony Pictures Classics. And then Sony started off with a agreement to distribute it in 30 cities. And eventually they brought it to 250 cities because it was doing so well. It's been playing in New York and LA it started July 29th. And here we are October 1st and it's still playing. So that's terrific because it is actually a small independent film. You can forget that when you're watching it because it looks big and lavish, and because we needed to create that illusion because it's about people with money, but it's a very small film. So it's done very well, and critically it's done very well.
The Times loved it.
The Times picked it as one of their picks. Rolling Stone loved it. So, and also just word of mouth has been terrific on this film because you don't have the marketing muscle that you have behind some of these big studio pictures. But we've had a very grassroots movement of people who have seen the film and feel like it speaks to something really essential, and then kind of have helped spread the word about it.
And the film, as I said, kind of started to bring up before, has been compared to Margin Call, which starred Demi Moore, among others. And I think probably that's why they compare it to that film, just because Demi Moore was in it and she's female. And that movie supposedly tells the story of the first few days of the financial crisis. But for those of us who are a little bit closer to that part of history, it's actually really dramatized, and it's frankly an inaccurate version of what happened. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about Equity, is that it isn't demonizing or dramatizing some bit of history. I mean, it has some bits of pop culture, right? The entrepreneur in the film is a little entitled and he wears hoodies. But often I think Hollywood is often pretty blatantly anti-business and is able to craft versions of stories that get widely told, but that aren't accurate and leave people with false impressions. Did you consciously choose not to do that in this film, or did that come up?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say probably the reason it's compared to Margin Call is also just the size of the film, because Margin Call also started as a small independent film, and a lot of the Wall Street movies we're familiar with, like Wolves of Wall Street and the original and Oliver Stone, a lot of those are big studio movies with big Hollywood money behind them. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the other reason we get that comparison. For us, it was an interesting process because the women and men, but mostly women who became investors in our film were almost exclusively people who had worked on Wall Street. We went to these people, and particularly women, and we said, do you agree that your stories of working women on Wall Street have not been told? Look at these other movies. There's Demi Moore is like a tiny, tiny part in that movie, and there are just no women in these other films unless they're secretaries or prostitutes.
Or naked in a bathtub with champagne.
Yeah. So and we had these women who were really passionate about getting that aspect of the story out there. At the same time, it was important to me that the story be truthful and be of our moment. And our moment is sort of post 2008. And there are a lot of complicated feelings about Wall Street. And I didn't want to glorify Wall Street or demonize Wall Street. I felt that a lot of the people I met, I was interested in these characters and people who they work in a system, and you can believe that the system as a whole is a good, important, necessary system, or you can believe it's a corrupt system. You can believe all sorts of things about it. But the people that go to work every day, they're living their lives within that system, and they believe in what their piece of it is. Particularly, since we were dealing with investment bankers doing IPOs, this is a big part of our economy, is that, a little startup firm can get money because they have access to an investment banker, and that's how they can go from their garage, that's how Facebook can become Facebook. And then they go public. It's a big part of the way that kind of the American success story.
Yeah, it's kind of like the American dream.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can say that dream is flawed, and it is for a lot of people. And, a lot of people don't have access to it. There's all kinds of things.
And you don't have to have an IPO to fulfill the American dream, but.
Sure. But I felt like, let's just look at what that is for the people that are engaged in that world. And I also felt that there were, like, Margin Call, fictionalized as it was, and some of the documentaries about the crisis have done a good job. They've done a good job of exploring what went wrong, why did it go wrong, who's to blame. And I didn't feel like we needed another movie to do that. So our movie was going to do something else, which was sort of be very character driven, be mostly about the issues that women are up against, and really look at this world of these people that go to work every day and play a part in something much bigger than themselves, and try to make their way through it. And that was really the approach we took.
Well, I thank you for that. I want you to know I respect that viewpoint, and it made it much easier for me to enjoy the film, and could be really focused on the plot instead of kind of thinking about history and what may be being well represented and what may be being misrepresented. So imagine, Amy, there's a woman listening to this show who really wants to get into filmmaking. And it's something I've always wondered. Would you give us a little insider information? How does the film get made and funded? How do you make money on the film? What happens when the film leaves the box office, and like that whole story? Sure.
So, I mean, basically, there are a couple ways movies get made in this country at this time. And so there's Hollywood, right? And in Hollywood, there are major studios. I can't remember because they keep consolidating, but I think there's 5 or 6 right now. And they are making superhero movies and franchises, and they're making a lot of giant movies with a lot of money behind them. And they are also making some smaller movies, usually where kind of middleman producer will bring a smaller project to a big studio and get the studio to finance it. So that's kind of the Hollywood system. And to break into that system as a young person, there's a few different ways, but a lot of times what happens is that people actually start outside the system. They start in the independent film world, which I'll describe. And then once they find some success there, they can transition over. So in the independent film world, which is what we did, it is literally you're making a film outside of that system. So you need to, it's become more accessible because the technology has advanced to where you don't have to shoot on film. We have digital video. You can go get hold of a very affordable camera and make a movie for a much, much smaller amount of money than you could 10 years ago. So really, in a sense, anyone can do it, but it requires skill and craft. It requires a really good story. In our case, I was a very experienced screenwriter. Sarah and Alicia were experienced actors, and Sarah had produced another film. Alicia through working in TV, she had resources within Hollywood, relationships in Hollywood that could be very helpful. Our director was someone who had gone to film school, and this was her second feature film. So we weren't total newcomers. And the process really is we started with the script. So I was writing the script at the same time that the producers were raising money. And in our case, people raise money different ways these days. You can do a Kickstarter campaign, which is how our director funded her first film. You can apply for grant money. In our case, we decided to go for individual investors, and we put together, I think, about 24 of them. And so we raised the money that way. And then as you get closer to going into production, you hire what's called a line producer. And that's the person who's sort of responsible for budgeting the film, making sure how many days are we going to shoot? What's the schedule going to look like? And making sure that the funds you have in place can cover that. So there's a lot of logistics. You're working with unions. You're working with Actors Equity, who has to give permission for actors to be a part of the film on a reduced scale because it's not a big budget film. You have to assemble a crew. In our case, we hired very experienced department heads. So our cinematographer, our production designer, our, costume designer, all of these people, we hired very experienced people, and then we had them hire a crew to work underneath them that could be a mix of experience levels. So it's a lot goes into producing a film, and you don't want to work with a team of people for whom nobody's ever done it before. I teach in a film school, and I actually am a big believer in film schools, and I don't just say that because I teach at one. I actually see that for our students, they come out after 3 years of coursework with a tremendous amount of learning, and they learn every aspect of the craft. So they learn writing, directing, producing, cinematography. And I see that when they come up, they're sort of positioned to begin to do this work on a larger scale. Now, there are also people that do this work without going to film school, and I have tremendous respect because I think the amount of sort of resources you need to pull together and craft you need to develop is extraordinary, but people do it. And that's kind of an amazing thing about it is that you can be a sort of self-made filmmaker.
And is it kind of a gamble? In other words, if film doesn't get picked up or doesn't hit in the box office, could you face the prospect of not getting paid for your work?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And to be honest, you could have your film picked up and still not get paid for your work. Because, you wouldn't get paid zero. But, in a case like this where we started out with very small amount of money, someone like me and the director and the two producers, we're all working for nothing for a long time just to get this thing off the ground.
Right.
And then although we do eventually get paid, it's all based on sort of how much money is left over once the film has cleared its costs. A lot of films don't ever make enough money. The crew people always get paid and the actors always get paid, but the people that initiated the project, the creative team, is always the last people to get paid. So, yes, it's a huge gamble. And we were really fortunate that we sold the film and that our investors made money and that everyone was, ultimately paid for their work. But it is a gamble. Investors often lose money when they invest in filmmaking. And we were very honest with our investors about that, because, and they have to decide, is this for them? I think in our case, a lot of them said, we didn't think we'd make money, but we cared enough about getting this story out there that we thought, if worst case scenario, this becomes a donation, that's fine. This is something I believe in. And they also got a lot of people invest in film for the glamour. And, I will say our investors got to come out to Sundance with us and had a big celebration in the snow in a yurt. I think that alone made it worth it for a lot of them, because that was just a side of something they hadn't been exposed to before.
Yes, the yurt is a perfect juxtaposition to the high rises of Wall Street.
Yeah.
And how the filmmakers make money is when people go see it in the box office, right? In the theater.
Well, ultimately, because we to Sony, the box office doesn't impact us as players because we've already been paid at the time the film's sold to a distributor. All of our outstanding bills get paid.
Okay, great.
But what the box office is important is that going forward for all of our careers, I will be known as a writer in Hollywood as someone who wrote a movie that grossed X amount of money. This is rather new for me because having done independent film, that's not how I've ever branded myself.
Right.
But interestingly, I just went to a conference. It was a Meryl Streep sponsors a screenwriting lab for women over 40. And I was asked to be one of the mentors. And I was just there and there were 3 other screenwriters there who've been working within the Hollywood system a lot longer. And when I looked through our bios, all 3 of their bios started with so-and-so's movies have grossed X amount of money at the box office. Uh-huh. It was not something I ever would have thought to start my bio with, but I started to realize, in that Hollywood system, that is how that's
the currency.
That's what makes you a hot screenwriter, is not how many people liked your movie or what the New York Times said about it, but, how much it made at the box office. And so we felt that it was incredibly important to get a good box office on this movie, not really for our own pocketbooks, but to send the message to Hollywood that we want to see audiences want to see content developed by women, content directed and written by women. They want to see women on the screen. And the only way to really send that message is through how well the movie does.
Mm-hmm. So then what happens when the movie goes to like a Netflix? Is it Sony making the money after that? Or because I guess your financial part of the film is already complete, you said.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. So in that case, everything else is Sony. Now the film is an investment for Sony. And the question is, what they bought it for. And then everything that they make, whether it's box office, whether it's streaming, comes back. And then now, ideally, they make money off the film. And then they can then put that money into the next independent film that they want to buy and support.
And it all comes full circle.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Little peek behind the Hollywood curtain there for you. And now last question, Amy, what has been your favorite part of all of this?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I've had a great experience, and I have to say that can be unusual for the screenwriter. There's a sort of mythology, although it tends to be quite true, that the writer is sort of the bottom of the totem pole in the film business. And that can be very true. And that was true on my first film, in that a lot of times once you finish writing the script, it's really out of your hands. What happens, how it's cast, how it's directed. A lot of times you sort of move on to your next project. And I am a person who loves the whole creative process. So for me, working with this particular team, they were extremely open to me being involved. So I was on set a lot. I was even in the editing room some of the time. I got to know the cast. I got to know the crew. And that for me has been really, really terrific, because back when I started in theater, those were kind of my people. Like, I loved I didn't just love writing. I loved being in the theater and the whole experience of the rehearsal process. And so really to have been able to go through those aspects of it. And even when the film premiered, to be at the party standing next to the cinematographer and the gaffer and all these people that I'd gotten to know to celebrate this thing that we made together. For me, that's very special.
Well, congratulations on your success. And it is a beautiful film. And Profit Bosses, your homework from me after you listen to this interview is to go see the film. It's still in theaters as of today. I don't know where Amy shared with me. We don't know exactly where it'll be, but certainly available to watch. And let me know in the private Facebook group what you think. Amy Fox, thank you for joining us on Profit Boss Radio.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Profit Boss, thanks for making it to the end of another episode of PBR. I have been doing a lot of thinking about you. I'm thinking about how hard it can be to change old habits. I mean, sometimes I think how nice it would be if things worked like they did for Keanu Reeves in those Matrix movies. If we could just lie back in an industrial punk rock barber chair and have a little cable plugged into the backs of our necks and just instantly become the masters of our financial domains. That would be kind of perfect, right? Except for the part about having the cable plugged into the back of your neck and the whole industrial punk thing. And Keanu Reeves is so annoying when you get right down to it. But I think it's important to form new habits, especially ones as fun as being alerted when new episodes of Profit Boss Radio go live. You want to know a secret? This is one habit that's almost no work at all. All you have to do is head over to iTunes, find the Profit Boss Radio channel, and hit subscribe. That's it. Then each week, you'll automatically find the latest episode ready and waiting on your favorite device. And the best part is that subscribing to Profit Boss Radio is just the beginning of other wonderful habits, like taking control of your money and learning how to build wealth or starring in your own reality show. Well, maybe not that one, unless it's on YouTube and self-produced. But plenty of great stuff is sure to happen when you subscribe. So what are you waiting for?
Thank you for listening to Profit Boss Radio, where creating success on our own terms happens every day. You're not alone in your journey to a rich life, and that's why Hillary is here to add value in each and every episode. See you next time on the podcast for women and money.